I had the pleasure of recruiting lots of lawyers for my law firm from a variety of schools all over the country, and then working with young lawyers and trying to turn them into really good, experienced lawyers. And there were always two things I looked for. One was grit, and the other was intellectual curiosity. Intellectual curiosity in particular is extremely important, I think, for anyone who's a professional, anyone in business, anyone in law. I have never in my life met someone with more intellectual curiosity than our speaker tonight, John Villaseñor. He is a person who is the definition of the Renaissance man. He's a professor of electrical engineering, public policy, and management, and a visiting professor at the law school. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. His work considers the broader impact of key technology trends, including advances in digital communications, the increasing complexity of today's networks and systems, and the growth of artificial intelligence, which we're going to hear about tonight. He's published in a wide variety of academic journals, but also in popular journals such as The Atlantic, Chronicle of Higher Education, Fast Company, Forbes, Huffington Post. I've read several of his articles that he's published in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and have often emailed him with my disagreements. So he just does a terrific job. He's provided congressional testimony on multiple occasions on topics such as drones, privacy, and intellectual property law. Before joining the faculty at UCLA, Professor Villaseñor was with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. In other words, he was a rocket scientist, where he developed methods of imaging Earth from space. So we're really excited to have him. We're glad we have a huge turnout tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, John.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for coming. So my plan is not to bore you. And one of the best ways to not bore you is to not talk for too long. And so my plan is to talk for maybe 20 minutes or so about some key sort of concepts and issues and challenges with artificial intelligence, and kind of seed the conversation. And then maybe we'll have 5 or 10 minutes of Q&A. And then what I'll do is I'll put up here the 3 sort of discussion questions that Joel just referred to a moment ago. I'll sort of brief those questions, 30 seconds or so on each question, just to kind of set the context, and then you're off to the races as you enjoy what I'm sure will be a good meal, and also discuss those questions. So if that's an acceptable plan, I'll just get right into it. So we're talking about artificial intelligence. I'm going to start out with a question I want to answer. What is artificial intelligence? Because someone give me a sentence or two about what AI is. Someone asked you, somebody in a room full of budding MBAs and JDs, somebody's got to have an answer for this. A one-sentence answer. Anybody? Yes?
A machine that replicates the human process?
That's a good answer, yeah. A machine that in some sense acts or reasons in a way similar to a human. Also, people often talk about learning, but that's a great answer. So here's what Britannica says AI is. The ability of a digital computer or computer-controlled robot to perform tasks commonly associated with intelligent beings, which is really essentially what your answer was. The term is frequently applied to the product of developing systems endowed with the intellectual processes characteristic of humans, such as the ability to reason, discover meaning, generalize, or learn from past experience. So that's as good a definition of artificial intelligence as any, and I thought it was good to sort of start out with a little level setting on that. AI touches all sorts of fascinating areas, and I won't actually hit all these. We'll hit a lot of them: ethics, geopolitics, labor, bias, regulation, and copywriting. In any one of these sub-areas of AI, you could run a PhD dissertation on, you could have a whole day-long conference on. There's lots of things you can do. So I'm going to not do them all justice, because I'm going to just spend a few minutes on each one. But I wanted to give you a historical perspective. So Alan Turing, many of you may be familiar with the name. He was a very famous British mathematician and computer scientist. Some people may have seen the game. What was the movie about him called? Imitation Game, right. And this is a paper he wrote, Imitation, and he talks about the Imitation Game. And so he was back in the mid-20th century, in the post-war years. He had been, during the war, he had been at the forefront of using the computers of the day, which of course, a room full of computers in that era had less power than a smartphone has today. But he was really at the forefront of asking, he says, I propose to consider the question, can machines think? So even in the very earliest days of the computing revolution, really before it even became much of a revolution, people like him, and particularly him, were sort of asking these questions of can machines think? And so the reason I mention that is because this question of can a machine be taught to reason in a way that might emulate the way a human might reason is not a new question, although the capabilities we have today are giving us the ability to answer that question far more thoroughly than Alan Turing could have back then. But one of the questions you can ask is, why now? Why is it that AI is, there's news articles about it all the time, there's talks like this, whereas 10 years ago, I don't know that I would have been invited to give an evening talk on AI. So what has happened in the last couple of years? So to answer that question, I thought it would be good to give a historical retrospective, a little bit, a brief one. Garry Kasparov, anyone remember who he is or know who he is? Chess player, really good one, right? He was one of the best, he was, I think, the best chess player in the world in the mid-1990s. And so he was playing against a computer. In 1995, he beat, one of the top computers in a chess match, and celebrating after the Cologne match, it was in Cologne, Germany, Kasparov said he did not think the computer would consistently outplay humans in his chess career. Right? So he's basically saying, in my career, which was going to span years more, because computers aren't going to outplay humans. So 2 years later, here was the headline: Swift and slashing, computer topples Kasparov. And this is what happens was IBM made a computer called Deep Blue, and in a series of matches, or say series of games, then Deep Blue beat the best player in the world. And this was big news, because this was the first time you had a machine that was able to beat the best human at a task, playing chess, which is just extraordinarily complex. It requires cognition and reason and analysis and strategy at the highest levels, and yet a computer was able to beat the world's best chess player. Now, Deep Blue, the IBM computer that beat Kasparov, was the product of years of person years of work. Many, many person years of work had gone into designing Deep Blue. There were scientists and engineers who poured months and years of their expertise into building this computer that could play chess really, really well. That was 1997. So now let's fast forward to 2 years ago. Google's AlphaZero beats champion chess program after teaching itself in 4 hours. That's what AI has done. In 4 hours, a Google computer went from not knowing anything about chess. It was just told the rules. And 4 hours later, it had essentially mastered the game. Right? No human could ever do that. Right? There's no human who could wake up one day not knowing anything about chess, and you could tell him or her the rules of chess at 10 a.m. and they'd be a world-class chess player by 2 p.m. Of course not. Completely impossible. So this was an example of the incredible progress that we've seen in AI. Whereas 2 decades ago it took years and years of labor to sort of make a computer play chess well. Now you just tell the computer the rules and you sit back and it sort of does its thing, and a few hours later it's a really great chess player. And so Garry Kasparov commented on that, said it's a remarkable achievement, right? Which it is. And so AI has accelerated to the point where it can not only match what humans can do, which was the big news in 1997 with IBM's Deep Blue, it can vastly exceed, at least in some domains, the ability of humans to sort of learn certain tasks. So AI is not, as people might think, not only in laboratories. It's out there in products that we all use right now. So what are some examples of products that use AI that all of you use? Any ideas? Yeah?
So when I call the secular company for the customer service, they use AI to respond.
They to handle those calls. What else? Netflix for recommendations of what you watch. What other products use AI that we all use? Yeah?
Samsung Galaxy S10.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Anything else? Amazon, what part of that for purchase recommendations? That's right. Yes.
Video games.
Video games, some of them use AI. Absolutely. Any other? Yeah.
Antivirus software.
Okay, some antivirus and?
Search engines.
Sorry?
Search engines.
Search engines, absolutely, yes. Tons of that. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Virtual assistants.
Virtual assistants, yes. Exactly. We could keep going. We could spend the next 10 minutes. So here's some examples: Siri, Amazon, Netflix, Tesla, driverless cars, Google Maps, Uber, Lyft, Alexa, Pandora, and everything else you said. So AI has long since migrated out of the laboratory and into products. What's going to be interesting, though, is to see how much more common and more capable it's going to get in the coming years. So AI is no longer just the domain of researchers and labs. It's out there, as all of you know. So I'm going to go through some interesting questions. So one of them, how many people here have heard of the trolley problem? For those of you who haven't heard it, just a reminder that it's one of these ethicists' thought experiments that goes back many years. You have a trolley that's going down a track, and if you do nothing, it's going to hit and kill 5 people. But there's a switch that you can choose to move, and if you move the switch, the trolley gets directed onto a different track and kills 1 person. So the question is, what should you do, right? And you can make an argument that, well, it's terrible that anyone dies, but it's better that 1 person die instead of 5 people, being killed, and so you should move the switch. And the counter argument is, well, if you move the switch, then you're taking an action, right, that you know is going to result in the death of a person, or arguably that's worse than you not actually taking that action. So ethicists have debated this for many years. But what AI has done, when you get to things like driverless cars, it has forced us, this type of question goes away from the domain of the sort of purely theoretical and squarely into the very practical. And I'll give you an example why. If you're driving a regular car, like not an AI, it's just you driving a car, and you're driving and you're coming to a green light, and all of a sudden you notice there's a car that's going to run the red light, and there could be an accident. As a human being, you really only have time to sort of notice it and slam on the brakes and hopefully avoid the accident, but you don't really have time to sort of think too much about what you're going to do. For a computer, a driverless car, that half a second or second is an eternity. The computer can game out 50 different possible courses of action, any one of which, or any 5 of which, or 10 of which might result in different levels of harm to different sort of actors who are on the scene at that time. And obviously, if you can avoid any harm, you will. But if there has to be an accident, just because of the dynamics of the 2 vehicles involved, then the question is, what kind of accident should there be? And with artificial intelligence, you have the possibility, the need, in fact, to do that sort of analysis and make these decisions. So the trolley problem has become real. So there was a fascinating study that came out just, I think it was like 6 months or so ago. And so this is an example. So some researchers asked people all over the world some questions related to the kinds of decisions that AI machines and cars are going to have to make. So here's one picture from the example. An autonomous vehicle experiences a sudden brake failure. Staying on course would result in the death of 2 elderly men and an elderly woman who are crossing despite the fact that there's a do not cross signal. Swerving would result in the death of 3 passengers, an adult man, an adult woman, and a boy, in the right case. Right? So these researchers would put a scenario like this in front of people and say, well, what should you do? What's the right answer? Right? And so they asked many people, and they asked people all over the world. This is a map of, the red shows the locations of people, and of course it's a representation from pretty much many different countries around the world. And so they were able to infer some fascinating things. And this matters, they were asking humans, not machines. But the reason this matters is because humans are going to program the machines, and so we have to decide sort of what our standards are that we're going to try to program into the machines. So one question is, what are our standards? What are the sort of right answers to some of these ethical questions, and how do we then convey those answers so that the machines will hopefully follow our instruction on that point? And so one of the things you could infer is they did this ranking of sort of how people prioritize different people. And, so for example, a person with a stroller was given extremely high priority, and a cat was given lower than a dog. And, I don't know, cat lovers here just reporting this information, lower than a criminal, in fact, right? But they have this sort of prioritization. And it's sort of entertaining, but it's also, these are serious questions that people are going to have to ponder. Another thing they did, which was really interesting, which is look at some regional differences. So this is, Western countries, Eastern countries, Southern countries, and you could look at, for example, differences in how people in different regions tend to view sparing the young, or sparing the lawful, or sparing higher status, right? And so, sparing the lawful, for whatever reason, was given much higher priority, in the Eastern places than sparing the lawful, less in the Southern. So, the point being that there are some, sort of ethical sort of questions that are sort of universally, viewed, this sort of an answer that people all over the world would probably agree on. But this also shows that not everyone would even agree on, even humans don't have necessarily a universal right answer to how you might prioritize these sorts of things. So the complexity when you have AI is not only do you want to try to figure out a way to make AI act in a way that is, quote, ethical, but you have the problem or the challenge that not everyone agrees around the world or even in one particular place on what is the right ethical thing to do in any sort of situation. Again, these are not theoretical questions. The makers of machines, AI, are going to have to either directly or indirectly contemplate some of these things. Another thing I'll move on to briefly is geopolitics. AI is going to be one of the most interesting, important aspects influencing geopolitics in the next decade. So Russian President Vladimir Putin said a year and a half ago or so, artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Russia, but for all humankind. Whoever becomes the leader in this field will become the ruler of the world. Now, even if your goal is not to be the ruler of the world, you should ignore that at your peril, in the sense that AI really is a geopolitical enabler, and those countries that capitalize on it and leverage it more effectively will see their geopolitical status increase. So over the coming decade, AI is going to become linked to geopolitics to a level that's really hard to comprehend today. We're just, yes, it's in Siri, yes, it's in Amazon, yes, it's in Netflix. It hasn't really reshaped the geopolitical landscape yet, but it will. And like the first industrial revolution, AI is going to also reshape the relationship between capital and labor around the world. And so that's a fundamental importance to economies, but it's fundamentally important to geopolitics as well. So if you look at many of the things that impact geopolitics, AI is going to reshape all of these things, right? It's going to reshape cybersecurity, national security, robotics, manufacturing, trade, information, transportation, labor, agriculture, all these things. So these are many of the key things that determine the geopolitical state of a nation. And these things will be heavily influenced by and changed by AI over the next decade. So it's not, there's a lot of hype, but AI is one of the few things where I actually think the hype is actually quite justified in terms of its potential long-term impact. Another area of AI that's very, very important is bias. Like this issue of that when we have AI making decisions, those decisions could end up being biased in various ways. Biased against by gender, by race, and so on. And the challenge is that I've sort of identified, this is from a paper or an article I published just a couple of weeks ago, that I see sort of four key challenges related to bias. One is bias built into data, right? So if you look at things like credit history might sound initially like it's objective data, but of course credit history is intertwined with all sorts of bias that may have gone into decisions whether to extend someone credit or not, and so on. AI can also induce its own bias, right? In other words, one of the things AI does is it doesn't just do what you told it to do. It starts out doing what you told it to do, but then it learns and does new things that you didn't tell it to do. And so how do you guard against an AI system from introducing its own bias, right? That you might not even see because it's a black box and you're just seeing the outputs, right? How do you protect against that? That's a big challenge. Another thing is teaching human rules to AI. We have some pretty complicated rules about bias, right? It is an absolute no-no, as it should be a no-no, to, for example, make hiring decisions based on gender. On the other hand, we have car insurance rates where it's completely normal to charge differentially based on gender, right? And so an AI system might say, well, if it's okay to use gender when I calculate car insurance rate, maybe I should use religion, right? Because maybe there's some correlation to exploit there and I can make some more money that way. Well, that would be a no-no, right? But the AI wouldn't necessarily know that unless we actually told them that, well, yeah, it's okay to use gender for car insurance differentiation, but it's not okay to use religion, right? The AI, how would the AI know that, right? So we have to teach those rules to AI. And then also evaluating allegations of bias, right? I mean, how do you know? If someone said, it's easy to assert that an AI system is acting in a way that's biased, but sometimes it might be obvious, but sometimes it might not be obvious. So it's really a challenge. Those are going to be challenges as we sort of get AI deployed in more environments. One way AI is being used right now is in crime and also in the criminal justice system. So this is an article actually from 4 or 5 years ago now where it says Chicago's new police computer predicts crimes, but is it racist? So they at least at that time were using an AI-based system to try to identify, for example, people who might be more likely to commit crimes. And then the question is, well, how do you do that? Or when you do that, are you at risk of ending up making decisions that are influenced by bias? Another thing is there's something called PredPoll, which is basically created by UCLA scientists. One of the things it does is identify hotspots, places, physical places, neighborhoods where, based on its data crunching, it thinks crimes might be more likely to occur. AI is also being used in sentencing and parole recommendations. So for example, when somebody has been convicted of a crime and the judge is then charged with the task of deciding what this person's sentence will be, then there are places where AI is used to make the recommendation of a sentence, or when it's time to decide whether somebody who has been in jail should be paroled or not. There's systems that, based on AI, try to make those decisions. And there's all sorts of complexities that can arise. I mean, for example, one of the variables that is sometimes used when making these decisions is the number of prior felony arrests, right? Now, you could argue that, well, that's just an objective piece of data. But on the other hand, is it really objective, or is there in some sense bias built into felony arrest data? Because all else being equal, right, there might be bias in the way that people get arrested or not, right? So it's a really, really complicated issue. So the issue of AI in sentencing and criminal justice generally and policing is really, really complicated. It's highly intertwined with bias. And then the next to last thing I'll talk about is deepfakes. Anyone here heard of deepfakes? Some of you. So deepfakes, for those of you who haven't heard of them, you've heard of them now. Deepfakes are videos that they make people appear to be saying or doing things that they never actually said or did. And the technology to do that has become extraordinarily good just in the last couple of years, and really, really available. If any of you wanted to make a deepfake tomorrow, you could. The software is out there on the internet. And so they can target famous people. They can also target people who aren't so famous. This is a deepfake of President Obama, but it's not really him talking.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time.
So he didn't actually say that. This is a deepfake that makes him look like saying that.
That might look like President Obama addressing the nation, but it's not. It's actually actor and comedian Jordan Peele impersonating the former president, mixed with old video of Obama.
So it's pretty interesting, right? So now I'm going to give you a test, right? So here's a test. All right. One of these images, either the image on the left or the image on the right is a deep fake. So raise your hand if you think the image on the left is the deep fake. Okay, raise your hand if you think it's the image on the right. All right, so okay, that one's pretty easy. So most people got that. So your answer is correct. All right, I got 3 more of these things. All right, so actually we'll do, try another one. All right, so, okay. Raise your hand if you think it's the image on the left that's the deep fake. Okay, how about the right? Okay, the right still, okay, let's see if that's right here. Correct, all right, you're pretty good. All right. Next to last one. All right, raise your hand if you think it's the one on the left. That's more people there. How about the right? The right. The right still, I think there's more people who think it's the right, so let's go with that. Incorrect. Yeah, see, that one fooled you, right? Okay, and last one. Okay, if you think the left is the deep fake, hand. Right? It's hard. I don't know. It seems like I think maybe there's a little more people on the left, so we'll see if the incorrect. So it's hard, right? So I mean, and this technology, today, this technology is going to be much better. And so deep fakes, and by the way, I'll show you, this is, if you ever remember the movie Forrest Gump a long time ago. So this is a scene from Forrest Gump where Tom Hanks meets President Kennedy. It's probably been a while since you saw the movie, if you saw it. So this is sort of this movie was made in the mid-90s. And so this is not using AI. This was made with painstaking digital editing over the course, presumably, of many, many hours. They did a pretty good job with it. It actually looks like he's in the video with President Kennedy there, right? But the point here is that, in the 1990s, you had to be a major movie studio to be able to do that, right? Whereas today, you just need to have, my computer, my MacBook Air right now could make a really, really good deepfake. And so the technology has become so good. So it scrambles our understanding of truth in various ways. First of all, we don't necessarily know if something is real, right? We see a video. We've all grown up in basically with this idea that seeing is believing. If we see the video of somebody saying something or doing something, well, clearly it happened. Well, maybe not, right? Not in the world of deepfakes. And it also has the corollary effect of creating deniability to real things, right? So if a politician, a video emerges, a real video of a politician saying something that is, highly offensive and damaging to his or her reputation, the politician might simply say, no, it wasn't me, it was a deep fake. And it gets hard to know, what's true and what's not. So as complex as it has become in the kind of din of information that we're subjected to these days in knowing truth and assessing truth and what's real and what's not, as complex as it is in a world without deepfakes, it's all the more complex when we have this issue of deepfakes. It's a really, really complicated issue. So that's another aspect, and these are, again, it's AI that enables this to be done really easily. So with AI, what you could do is you could take a picture of my face, like 5 or 6 pictures of my face, my head from different angles, you give them into a computer, and you could make me say anything you wanted to make me say, right? Even though I never actually said it. Now, it would look, the technology would make it look really realistic. Regulation, one of my questions that I'm going to ask you to think about is about regulation. So there's frequent calls for regulating AI, questions about what that would mean, who would do the regulating, how that would be enforced. There's questions of capacity to regulate. And so I'll return to that when I sort of seed the questions. And then the final thing I'm going to do is close with, by the way, what artist is this? Rembrandt. That's sort of right, but Rembrandt didn't paint this. AI did, right? An AI machine learned the characteristics of Rembrandt and created a painting. This doesn't exist. I mean, Rembrandt never painted this painting, right? But AI created this by learning the characteristics of painting that Rembrandt was known for, and then created this completely new work. And so the final thing I'll mention is this whole question of copyright and creative works. And as we move into an era where computers, AI, can create things that appear to be genuinely creative, what does that mean for things like copyright? It's a really interesting question. So the question is, can humans be authors of, or non-humans be authors of creative works? And right now the answer is no, by the way, according to the US Copyright Office. Human authorship requirement, it's got to be a person. Some of you might have been familiar with the monkey selfie case. Remember this? Where there's a monkey took a selfie, and then there was a lawsuit, and the monkey was represented by some people, and the monkey lost the lawsuit, and so anyway. But it's funny, but it's entertaining, but it's also an interesting question, right? So the monkey was photograph taken by a monkey, a mural painted by an elephant. These are things that cannot be copyrighted. A claim based on the appearance of animal skin. So the Copyright Office has had to sort of answer some of these questions in the past, but as AI becomes more and more capable of generating creative works, there's some really interesting questions, right? The argument in favor of saying, hey, there should be some copyright rights is, well, if the creativity in some sense came from the machine, well, then you argue that copyright is there to reward creativity. But on the other hand, if you grant the copyright to the machine, you're sort of granting an agency, and then if somebody makes a mean robot that goes and kills somebody, you can say, it wasn't me, it was the robot who killed the person. Let's go throw the robot in jail for 100 years, but it wouldn't matter because the robot would just sleep for 100 years and wake up, right? And so this question of sort of agency and all these things become really, really interesting. So fascinating examples about sort of that get raised when you have AI being able to do these really, really amazing things. So with that, I'm going to introduce these questions later, but I'm going to stop for 5 minutes or so and see if there's some questions and answers, or questions, and I'll try to have answers. And if there are none, I'll go. Any questions? Yes, sir.
A lot of the focus is on sort of naturally enough on the scary things, or that we might call AI weapons.
Right.
But it's not clear to me that there's any reason why the speed of development of countermeasures would be necessarily slower. So do you envision a reason why there would be a secular trend of the weapons outpacing the countermeasures, or do you envision like a permanent stalemate?
That's a great question. I guess defense is always harder than offense, right? In the sense, and I'm not really as much familiar with the weapon side of it, but I do a lot of work in cybersecurity. And I can tell you that for cybersecurity, the problem is the attackers, it's the analogy I use when I'm teaching, it's like, I grew up where there was a lot of snow, and so you think of the attackers are throwing snowballs at you, and you're trying to block the snowballs. And even if you're really good at blocking the snowballs, they just have to hit you with one. You're hit with the snowballs. So that's the challenge. Is defense is always much, much harder. So there's a huge asymmetry there, and I think it certainly applies in cybersecurity, and it's going to apply with weapons as well. There will be AI countermeasures, but it's still harder. Defense, you mess up once, you're in trouble. Offense, you can mess up a bunch of times, and you're still in the game.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Any other questions? We got a question up here. So.
Where do you see increased opportunities for business besides what we already discussed?
Yeah, that's a great. So I think I think it is incumbent upon people in business to really think carefully about how AI is going to reshape. There's really very few sectors it's not going to reshape, there is a lot of money to be made by getting on the right sort of side of that, and frankly, a lot of money to be lost by not doing that. The best analogy I can think of is back in the mid-1990s. I'm old enough to remember when sort of internet browsers first came out, and there were some businesses that really sort of got behind the internet and realized it was going to be a complete game changer, and there were some who didn't, or some that didn't, so yeah, I think, but how it's going to, there's not a clean answer, because how AI is going to impact, let's say, agriculture is just completely different from how it's going to impact, for example, education, right? And there's some things it's not going to impact, right? Like, an event like this with a person talking, I don't think, a robot would do the same thing, right? So there's certain kinds of things that it's not going to replace, but yeah, it's a huge, every major company that has anything remotely having to do with technology ought to be looking at least, if not to affirmatively decide it's not going to be a factor, they should at least take an affirmative look at AI. It's a great question.
So we've talked a lot about specific AI, I think, which is just an AI that is really good at one singular thing.
Right.
Do you have any comment on the landscape of the general AI, kind of what we think of as just like an all-intelligent AI, and any timeline on that?
I'm a little skeptical about that. I mean, specialization has enormous benefits, and I think that's going to apply, for machines as well. I certainly think there can be some commonalities, like a AI machine that's great at playing chess is probably going to be, good at playing Go, right? But not necessarily good at, navigating, a ship through a crowded ship channel or something, right? The number of skills are so different. So I don't much worry about there's going to be some machine that becomes better at everybody at everything or something like that. That's not a worry I have. Some people have that worry. I don't.
Thank you for your talk. It's very interesting. Your comment on deepfakes, on how it could scramble our pursuit of truth, I think is interesting. Do you think as a species we'll have to evolve from an epistemological standpoint, different taxonomies or pursuits of knowledge, or how is that going to change how we think about knowledge and obtain it?
That's a great. I think there are some people who think that AI is going to sort of fundamentally change who we are or need to be as humans, and that's to me. I'm not one of those people. I don't believe that. I think there will still be a clean distinction between humans and machines, and I think we will still have the ability to sort of make. It's not going to sort of threaten us in terms of our conception of the world and things like that. But I do think it accelerates the trend we even see without AI of sort of when it's misused. I want to also say I think AI is in general a positive thing. It has enormous benefits that come from AI. So in focusing on deepfakes, I'm only talking about one particular application which does have malicious uses, but I do think that it does scramble truth in a way that we have to be much more vigilant about what we see than we did in the past. And we went through, we didn't have video 200 years ago, right? And then we went through several decades where we had video, and video, because it existed, by nature of its existence, it was true, right? And now we're sort of moving beyond that to the fact that video exists no longer means it's true. But I don't think that it has implications for truth, but not for sort of the more fundamental things. I would think. I could be wrong, but that's what I think.
So I have a data scientist friend, and he always talks to me. He says the biggest issue he sees AI now, the problem is AI tell you how it gets results, but it didn't tell you how it gets there. It didn't tell you the logic behind that. So is that true, and how do we adjust and validate that?
It's a great question. So the question is, we know what AI does, but we don't necessarily know what's inside the black box, right? So we know the outputs of the box, but we don't know and that is true, right? I mean, you could certainly design an AI system that tells you, but you might not. I don't think that itself is necessarily a problem in some contexts, but it is potentially a problem in other contexts. I'll give you a very specific example. One of the projects I'm looking at right now is the issue of sentencing and parole. And the question of a person who is sentenced pursuant to, the AI system provides a sentencing recommendation or a parole recommendation to a judge, and the judge takes that under consideration, and then he or she issues a sentencing recommendation or there's a parole decision or something. And the question is, from a due process standpoint, does the person impacted by that have a constitutional right to know what the algorithm was, right, that went into that? You can make a pretty good argument that the answer is yes. Now, the counter argument would be like, well, in some cases when a judge issues a sentence, you may not know exactly what the thought process is inside the judge's mind either, right? So you can make an argument both sides. But I think there's at least a compelling argument in some cases, some applications that you would want to know that. Another reason you want to know it is, for example, if there's an accusation of bias in AI, right? And you want to know, is this AI making decisions based on some sort of bias that's improper? To answer that question, you have to know how it's making the decisions, right? So there's cases like that might, On the other hand, I can also imagine cases where it doesn't matter. If you have AI-assisted surgery, right? And the AI-assisted surgery is learning so well that it's doing a particular very sensitive surgery much better than the best human surgeon. I mean, it would be nice to know exactly what it's doing, but the fact that it's doing it well is still useful, even if you didn't know exactly the algorithm it's using. So it's a great question. So maybe one or two other questions that we have, and then yeah.
Thank you very much for some thought-provoking concepts. Part of the conversation of AI that's very interesting to me is the geopolitical gain that you touched on. And part of that conversation is the fact that the United States may not be the leader to some of the premier advancements there. Can you expand on, from a public policy standpoint, what the United States could do to create and harness more innovation and kind of be a frontier leader?
My opinion is I think currently the United States still is the global leader in AI. If you just look at the ecosystem we have here, the number of people doing AI work in educational research institutions, the number of companies like Google and IBM and Amazon and Microsoft, the sort of human capital we have in AI is absolutely extraordinary. When people talk about sort of countries, the country that always comes up also is China, which is investing enormous amounts in AI and rapidly building a capability and has a plan to be a leader, global leader in a number of years. I guess one way I look at that is that AI really isn't a zero-sum game in the sense that advances by China or pick your other country don't necessarily, that doesn't mean that we can't advance as well. That said, we would be remiss, if we fail to have a kind of a national vision on the role of AI in the geopolitical context. And I'm sure, I don't know all the things that the US government is sort of thinking about in that context, but I hope that people are giving sort of AI is a game that needs to be played over timescales that vastly exceed the terms of elected office of members of Congress and the president and things like that. This is something that's going to be impacting us 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, right? And so I would hope that we are giving careful strategic thought to what we should be doing to maintaining global sort of excellence in that. And part of that would be investing in research and things like that. But it's a great question.
Are there legal grounds to sue or prosecute an individual for the production of a deepfake yet?
That's a great. So I just published a piece a week ago on that topic. And so the short answer is there's a bunch of frameworks that are arguably relevant. So for example, there's defamation. There's the tort of intentional infliction of emotional distress. There is then the intention with that is the First Amendment, right? I mean, so one of the challenges, you can't simply say, well, if you make a video showing somebody doing or saying something they didn't actually do or say, then you undermine the ability of movie studios to tell stories using digital replicas and things like that. So there's a very significant First Amendment issue there as well. But so there's defamation, there's false light, there's intentional infliction of emotional distress, there's copyright law to the extent that production of a deep fake would involve copyright. So the challenge is that legislators are getting the message that they have to do something. And so they're starting to propose legislation, but it's becoming, so for example, there was a bill proposed at the end of December, which has expired because we have a new Congress now, but it would have criminalized, it would have said if you make a deep fake, and it basically would have criminalized it, and it would have even taken a civil tort and turned it into a criminal matter, which is kind of, defamation is not a criminal, it's a civil thing, but it would have criminalized defamation if it's done through deepfakes. I think that's a problem, right? So the short answer is there's a bunch of stuff, existing legal frameworks that can be used against deepfakes. Also, another one I didn't mention is right of publicity is another one. But the open question is to what extent those will be protective. But my personal philosophy is that it's always better to sort of see if you need new legislation before you go sort of just layering on new legislation. So the current frameworks have not failed in that they haven't been tested. As far as I'm aware, there have been no cases about, specifically about deepfakes. And it's challenging because, for example, sometimes people draw the analogy with like revenge porn, and there are laws, as there should be, that criminalize revenge porn. But the challenge, the difference is with revenge porn, there's a really good way to ground those laws because it's invasion of privacy. It's publication of private facts, right? And there's no constitutional question with criminalizing revenge porn. The problem is that when you publish a deepfake, you're not actually publishing a fact, right? You're publishing something that didn't happen, right? And so the normal, the normal sort of frameworks for, say, invasion of privacy don't necessarily apply. At least this invasion of privacy is sort of 4 sub-parts, but one of them is publication of private facts. And so it's a question, it's a really complicated question. Somebody else has a very quick,
Yeah, quick follow-up on that is like, why is this fundamentally different from someone just writing in text something that didn't really happen? Like, I don't see why it's, in legal grounds, different than writing a story about someone that's not true.
I guess I would say that if someone just writes a story, so if someone writes in text, John robbed a bank yesterday, right? That is, I think, less compelling to people and less alarming than if someone publishes a video that really seems to show me sprinting out of a bank with bags of cash, being chased by the police or something like that, right? My ability to deny it. If someone if someone tweets that John robbed a bank yesterday, I can be like, that's ridiculous. I was giving a talk at UCLA, right? If someone shows the video, people are like, look, it's the video, right? And so you get it's easy to create these competing narratives. As I think part of the video is more powerful. It always is, right? If you think about sort of when there's video about anything, the fact that it's more powerful. So I think that applies in this context. These are great questions. So let me just close with the 3 questions that I was going to suggest that you look at. Number 1 is some people believe that new AI regulation is necessary. Others argue that new AI regulation would have few benefits and would also stifle innovation. What do you think? Legitimate question, really interesting question to talk about. Secondly, is it acceptable to use AI-based systems to make sentencing or parole recommendations? This is the threshold question is it okay? And if the answer is yes, do people impacted by those decisions have the right to know the details of the underlying algorithms? And by the way, when these are challenged, and this, by the way, deepfakes, as far as I know, have not been the subject of any sort of litigation. This has been the subject of court cases, and often the companies that make this software allege that trade secret law protects them from the need to disclose. And they said we can't disclose it because it would be harmful to our business. These are our trade secrets. We're protecting them. We can't tell you. So that's the second question. And then the third question is, what is the best way to maximize the likelihood that when faced with decisions with ethical implications, AI systems will make the, quote, right choice, with the full understanding that the right choice may not even be something that we would all agree on, given different views on these things. So, and if you can answer these over the course of dinner, then you're doing far better than everybody else in this field. This is a pretty serious set of questions, but hopefully that's more than enough food for thought, and thank you very much for being here.